Okay, I want to finish this up today. A couple of very important points here. In Perek Lamed Ches Pasuk Chaf Hey. So we're in this issue with Yehuda and Tamar, and Yehuda gives her, Tamar, he wants to give her to pay her for her services. So he says, what she says to page 210. She says, what are you going to pay me? He says, I'll send you a goat. So she says to him, well, give me a security. I need a security till that happens. So in the middle of page 210, Vayomer moha irovonata eten loch. What should I give you? Vatomer chosamcha, your seal, ufisilecha. How did the article translate fisilecha? Your seal, your wrap, is some sort of garment. Umatcha asher biyadecha, your staff. Vayiten lo vayovoy le vatahar lo. Now, I mean, look what he's given her. He's given her very personal items over here. He's giving her a seal. It's like giving a girl your credit card. He's giving her a blank check over here. Like, whoa. So then afterwards, she goes off, and Yehuda sends with his friend. He sends in Pasuk Chaf, Vayishlach Yehuda's Gediayisim biyad re'ehu adulami. He sends the goat with his friend, the Adulami, the guy we met originally. L'kachas ha'irovat miyad ha'isha v'lo matzav, to go find it. And he didn't find, to go take his security back, and never got it back. Couldn't find the woman. So, of course, this is the first time we ever see somebody referred to as a friend, by the way. We never find somebody's friend. Because this is the sort of thing you only do with a friend. Like, hey, could you do me a favor? Could you go get, I'll tell you, I got here. And so, got to be a close friend over here. It's not gonna, I can just go send anybody and tell them, by the way, I gave my stuff to a harlot. You're asking your friend to go. So, they can't find her. And then they come to Yehuda 3 months later, and they say, by the way, your daughter-in-law is pregnant. So, they assemble a Beis Din. And Yehuda says, okay, she's going to have to, take her out and execute her. She has to burn to death. Because they had made a pact from the time of the flood. Noachide made a pact that immorality is unacceptable. And here she's pregnant. So she's on her way out to be burnt. And look what she does. Now, what would you do under these circumstances? If I was the woman under these circumstances, I would do one of two things. I would either say, Yehuda, can I talk to you first for a second before we do this? Right? Or I would make a public service announcement. I would send out something I would send something on the internet. Hey, look what's about to happen over here. And what does she do? She sends back the stuff in Pasuk Gimel, in third line from 212. He mutzates. She was taken out. V'sholcha el chamei lemor. La'isha asher ele lo anochi hora. I'm pregnant to the man who these belong to. V'atomer haker na lamiach osemes v'apsilim. And Yehuda goes and he announces, it was me. It was me. So we learned here for a couple of things from the Gemara. The Gemara says a couple of very important lessons that we learned. Lesson number one is that Tamar was not willing to embarrass him. Tamar said, if he is willing to do it, if he's willing to if he's willing to admit, then he'll admit. If not, I'll die. And the Gemara says, based on this, Noach lo la'odam shia pilatzvo lakiv shanesh. Better for a person to jump into a furnace. Do not embarrass somebody else in public. That's what the statement of the Gemara is. To embarrass somebody is called halbanas panim, whitening his face. And the reason is, when we think of somebody getting embarrassed, we think of a face turning red. Right? If something embarrassed turns red. What's happening is, when a face turns red, the Gemara says, at the first moment, the blood drains from the face. When you're embarrassed, instantaneously the blood drains, then it rushes back in, which is why we associate turning red. But at the first moment, the blood drains and then goes good. That draining of the blood, the Gemara says, is called spilling his blood. When you embarrass somebody in public, you're spilling their blood. So there's actually a machlokas haposkim, whether the Gemara means this in a musar way, the better to throw yourself in a furnace to not embarrass somebody, or does the Gemara mean it in a halachic way? You have to give up your life and not embarrass somebody the same way you have to give up your life and not murder somebody. There's actually an opinion that you actually have to give up your life and not embarrass somebody. And like practical jokes, that sort of thing. If somebody's going to be embarrassed by a practical joke, then what you're doing is you're basically murdering the guy. When you embarrass somebody, you murder him. And so the Gemara says that's what we learned. We learned from Tamar that Tamar says, "Hey, I'd rather die than have to go and allow you and embarrass Yehuda and Paul. If he admits, he admits, and then Yehuda goes ahead, and Yehuda admits that it was from him. That's the end of the story of Yehuda and Tamar. The very next story is Yosef and Mrs. Potiphar. Now, if you take a look in Pasuk in Perek Lamed Tes Pasuk Aleph, so it says. Rashi said, take a look at this. Yosef horid Mitzrayim, v'yikneu Potiphar srispar sarat tabachim ish mitzri miyada yishmaelim asher horidu shaba. Now you have to see this Rashi, because Rashi says, if the last Rashi on the page, on page 212, towards the bottom, why is this section of the Torah put next to the previous section? So Rashi first gives one parish, and then 3 lines from the bottom in Rashi, left column, 3 lines from the bottom on 212. Everybody find Ve'od. Kidei lismoch ma'aseh ishto shel Potiphar le'ma'aseh Tamar. It wants to juxtapose. It wants to place the incident of Mrs. Potiphar next to the incident of Tamar. What do you call it? Nathaniel, can you open that window over there? Lomar lecha, thank you. Ma'azu l'shem shemayim, just as Tamar was l'shem shemayim. We'll explain what that means in a second. Afzu l'shem shemayim. Mrs. Potiphar was also l'shem shemayim. She saw through astrology that she's going to have children from Yosef. She didn't know if it would be from her or from her daughter, and we see later on it is from the adopted daughter Osnas Bas Potiphar. He marries Osnas Bas Potiphar, which Chazal tell us was this Osnas Bas Potiphar. Yosef marries actually the daughter of Dinah who the brothers wanted to kill, and Yaakov sent her down to Mitzrayim. She became Potiphar's adopted daughter, and Yosef marries her. Okay, so that we spoke about the pendant that she had around her neck. Remember we spoke about that? The pendant with thing, and that's how she ended up marrying Yosef. Okay, so there are 2 points here. First of all, Yehuda and Tamar. In the old days, the Ramban says, there's something called yibum. Yibum is where when a man dies and they don't have children, the brother marries the wife. Even if he doesn't want to marry her, they do go through the chalitza ceremony. But by Torah law, preferably he's supposed to. Nowadays we don't do yibum. Nowadays it's chalitza only. But the Ramban says that even before the Torah was given, the ancients had a tradition that when a man would die childless, a relative married the wife. Somehow they had that tradition. The Ramban says this. And that's why Yehuda, even though he was the father-in-law, Yehuda was the father-in-law, but for him and Tamar, that was a form of yibum. It's a yibum. So we see this later on also, because interestingly, in the tribe of Yehuda also, when Boaz marries Ruth, Boaz is the nearest relative. There was one closer relative to marry. Remember, there's a debate who's going to marry her among the relatives of the deceased husband. And so Boaz and Ruth, even though it's not by letter of the law yibum, because he's not a brother, but he's a relative. So there was this concept of the relative marrying the widow. There was a concept. The relative marries the widow, and they have a child, and then the child somehow perpetuates the name of the one who's deceased. Now, here, the Rashi comes along and says, so Tamar, why did she try to entice Yehuda? Because she wanted to have children from Yehuda, because she knew that they were going to be great children. And therefore she was l'shem shemayim. Everything she did was l'shem shemayim. What does it tell us about Mrs. Potiphar? She goes to try to entice Yosef. It's l'shem shemayim. Why is it l'shem shemayim? Because l'shem shemayim is, she saw astrologically that she's going to have children. It's either her or her daughter. So where did she go wrong? Why is she condemned for history as being a wicked, evil, terrible, despicable person? And Tamar is a tzaddikas who becomes the matriarch of the entire Davidic line. What was it? They're both Hashem Shemayim. She was a married woman, number one. That's true, and she's forbidden right good. She's a married woman, and even more. Rashi says right here, she didn't know if it's going to be from her or her daughter. She paskin lakula. She already paskin lakula, right? I'm not sure, right? Okay, it must be me, right? And then we see even afterwards what a miserable person she is, because then she tries to get Yosef in trouble. So you could be l'shem shemayim. We joke around sometimes, l'shem shemayim. Some of the most dangerous people in the world are doing things l'shem shemayim. Right? When it's l'shem shemayim, be careful. Sometimes people want to throw stones at cars on Shabbos, l'shem shemayim. People try to burn trains for the light rail, l'shem shemayim. L'shem shemayim, be careful when it's l'shem shemayim. If you're so l'shem shemayim, go check with a higher authority to find out, because he's also l'shem shamayim. If he tells you no, so then it's not so l'shem shamayim, right? And so l'shem shamayim is a dangerous thing. But you notice that Rashi uses the same expression for both. So Yosef goes over there, and Mrs. Potiphar takes a liking to Yosef. Yosef's extremely handsome. What's his name? Potiphar, what do you call it? Potiphar is very, very fond of Yosef, and he sees he's a very talented guy. And the Gemara says, we learn from here, Teichef l'talmid chacham bracha. When a talmid chacham comes into the house is blessed. Because Yosef enters, Yosef's a talmid chacham, he enters Potiphar's house, so Potiphar starts prospering, and he understands that it's coming from this guy. And he's a talented guy. Now watch this. Take a look at Mrs. Potiphar. Rashi says, on Pasuk, take a look. I want to show you something fascinating now. Page 214. 7 lines from the top. Vayazov kol asher lo biyad Yosef. He leaves everything he's got in the hands of Yosef. V'lo yoda ito me'uma. He does not withhold anything from him. Ki im halechem asher hu ochel, except the bread that he consumes. It's the only thing he didn't give Yosef was the bread he consumes. V'hi Yosef yefei toar yefei mar. Yosef's very handsome. Take a look at Rashi. The second line of Rashi, right column. Ki im halechem. The only thing he withholds is the bread. Says what Rashi? What is bread? He ishto. It's referring to his wife. Ela shediber belosha nekia. The pasuk talks in a discreet, in a refined manner. Doesn't want to say his wife, so it says he withheld his bread. Now, gentlemen, you'll notice that on Shavuos we bring a sacrifice. We bring an offering on Shavuos. You know what the offering on Shavuos is? Shtei halechem, the two breads. The offering on Shavuos, we bring what's called the two breads, shtei halechem. And it's an offering that's brought on Shavuos. That's remarkable. The word lechem is related to what Hebrew word? Milchama. Milchama is a battle, a war. What's the connection?
Lechem is in between mem and hey in milchama.
Right, lechem is it. It's the root of the word. Milchama and lechem and lochem. Lochem is a fighter. Lochem is a fighter. That's the lechem. Because most wars ostensibly are fought over material goods. And when we talk about material, we even used to call, the hippies used to call money bread. Hey, you got any bread on you? Right? The hippies got bread, they still call it bread. I got some bread. Bread is bread. Hey, I want to win bread for my family. Come into my house, we'll break bread together. We're going to have more than that. Bread represents all material. So wars theoretically are fought over bread. Sometimes they're fought because somebody wants to maintain a political position. But most wars are because you want to conquer land, you want to conquer property. It's something of materialism. We find that there are two uses for bread. There is the literal use, which is bread, and there is the euphemistic use, which is woman. That means that there are two battles that we fight in the physical realm. There are two battles. There's the battle of food, and there's the battle of lechem in its euphemistic way. Those are the two battles a man has to fight. There is no other physical pleasure. All other pleasures are the pleasure of money, the pleasure of fame, the pleasure of glory. That's not a tangible physical pleasure. The tangible physical pleasures are food and non-males. Those are the tangible battles that we have to fight. And that's why it's called lechem, because that is the battle for every single person. That's the battle for every single man. Those are the fights. Those are the fights that we have to fight. Why do you bring the two showbreads on Shavuos? Now you're way ahead of me, I'm sure. Why are the two showbreads? What did we get on Shavuos? We got the Torah on Shavuos. And what are we doing when we offer the two showbreads? We're showing that the Torah is the way that we both enjoy and control ourselves in these areas which are so vulnerable. That means we are not in Judaism, we are not ascetics. We do not try to avoid and cut off completely. We live like normal human beings, but we live with self-control. It's got to be controlled as opposed to controlling us. The offering on Shavuos is acknowledging the fact that it's specific. One of the biggest misconceptions, I've said this many times, it can't be repeated enough. One of the biggest misconceptions people have from outside is they look at the frum world, they think we've made some sort of deal with God, that we will give up all of life's pleasures in exchange for some sort of some intangible reward in the world to come. And nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The truth of the matter is that we enjoy this world more than anybody else. Because if you don't live with self-control, you don't enjoy it. You get burnt out. And so we acknowledge what allows us to enjoy the pleasure, the physical world, and life in general, it's the Torah that we got on Shavuos. That's why we bring the two breads. The two breads acknowledges, we're not denying it, we're not cutting it off. We're showing, yes, we all know what it's like to be a human being. The Torah is what helps us to allow us to live life normally and to live life in a healthy manner. And without those things dominating us. That's why we bring it specifically on Shavuos. The idea, obviously wine and drink, that all goes into the category of consumption. Those are the two areas. The other misconception people have, and it's very much related, that people think pleasure equals happiness. And it doesn't. Pleasure does not equal happiness. Pleasure assists in achieving happiness if the pleasure is used properly. Why does every Jewish holiday involve food? Because we know that as human beings, when you sit down, every Shabbos, you sit down at a Shabbos table, the goal of Shabbos isn't the eating. The goal of Shabbos is spirituality. What's that got to do with more food than you've ever seen in one place at one time and every week? The tables, you've been to Shabbos tables, they're basically groaning under the load, right? What's that got to do with ruchnius? What's that got to do with that? The answer is because as human beings, we need that to put us in a mood that we can then focus on the ruchnius. Because we recognize what a human being is. It's what we call oneg Shabbos. And we go, oneg Shabbos, dips and chalt and dust, and but that's all part of it. That's all part of it because we're normal human beings. So the Torah is telling you, and a person who pursues pleasure for the sake of, honestly, between me and you, I got nothing against the guy too much. Does Donald Trump strike you as a happy person? No. Does Donald Trump strike you as a happy person? He strikes me, I don't know what's going on in his heart of hearts. He strikes me as a frustrated person, not as a happy person. This is a guy who's got every reason to be happy if happiness is measured based on your physical and on your material achievements. He's got every reason to be happy. Does he strike you as like, wow, this is guy just like Rav Samet? No. Somehow no. Somehow that the two of them are on the same planet doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. The answer is that when a person lives selfishly, you end up frustrated. When a person lives for other people, you live for giving yourself, you end up fulfilled. But we need the physical pleasures because that's part of life. Each person, whatever his needs are. Each person, whatever his needs are. That's what the Torah is telling you here. So Mrs. Potiphar starts up with Yosef, and look what she does. The first thing is she solicits him. And look at Yosef's response, because Yosef, this is a Musar lesson in and of itself. In Vayhi achar advarim ha'ela vatisa eshes adona v'seinei Yosef vatomer shichva imi. Whether she said it openly or he could tell by the look on her face, whatever it was, she was soliciting him. And look at his first, how does he respond? The first thing the Torah teaches us, you read that next word, there's a shalshelis above it. That's the trump. That's it. He refuses. And it looks like a chain. It's a chain. That means I've created a barrier. That means whenever there's an inappropriate temptation, or I should call it temptationette, right? Whenever there's an inappropriate temptation of any way, the first thing is no. There's nothing to talk about. No. Now you want a reason? I'll give you a reason. And Yosef says, because I'm not an ingrate. Yeah, first of all, I'm not an ingrate, and you shouldn't be an ingrate either. Your husband's given me everything, and I can't do this to him, and I also can't sin against God. But don't start with the explanations. First, no. Vayima'ain, refusal. You want an explanation? I'll give you an explanation. You don't always have to give. I've been asked several times over the years where guys are trying to cut off a relationship. A relationshipette, right? Guys are trying to cut off a relationship, and the Mrs. Potiphar on the other end isn't letting it go so fast. So guys say to me, what should I do? She's texting me, and she wants to meet, this and that. You know what the approach is? The approach is one message back. Hi, I've become a religious fanatic. I don't, this isn't going to work out between us. Have a great life, right? What if she texts again? So isn't there a way that you could change your blog? Isn't there a blog? You block, right? You block. You play for the NFL, right? She'll get the message. Yeah, you block. All that happens is if you maintain it, then eventually if you maintain it, eventually you're going to end up in trouble. You're going to end up with a test like Yosef HaTzadik, and believe me, most men are not Yosef HaTzadik. right? And therefore, the first thing is, you have to be polite. You do not meet in person. There's no reason to meet in person. All that could do is lead to all sorts of trouble. You very politely respond, listen, it was great, but whatever it is, I've turned over and I'm on a different path right now. I'm doing something else, and this is our last correspondence. And the idea that, but her feelings, this, that, and that. The feelings aren't going to, nothing's going to help. You've done what you have to do. This is what Hashem wants from you. Be polite, but be firm. First, it's a no. And if she doesn't get the message, you say to her, well, my wife insists that we don't communicate anymore, right? And then, but you're not married. No, that's okay. And, at a certain point, you just have to, and the answer, no. That's it, no connection. No more connection, that's it. Vayema'en. There's a chain. We created a barrier between us. There's a barrier, that's the way it is. It hurts, she's had feelings in that. That doesn't, there's a limit to that. There's a limit to that. Somebody who's trying to feed you treif, and you say no, are you worried about insulting them because they're trying to feed you treif? And you wouldn't worry about their feelings. You go, but she'll be insulted if I don't eat it. Yeah, but it's treif. You're not, she's serving you chazer. You're not going to eat it. That's what, she's trying to serve you chazer, even worse. Therefore, that's how you handle it. Okay? Now look what happens to Yosef. Look at this. By the way, I got to tell you a medrash. I got to tell you, this is an unbelievable medrash. And it's an extremely important medrash because this applies to the whole Torah. There's a Roman noblewoman saw Rabbi Yossi. Not Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yossi, the Tana. And she says to the Nosari, she says to Rabbi Yossi, come on. Who you trying to kid over here? Who's the Torah trying to kid? You got a 17-year-old red-blooded youth in a den of iniquity called Egypt, where his father's not around. Nobody's around to watch him. In other words, what we call a college campus. Nobody's around to watch him, and he's on his own, and he's being pursued by Mrs. Potiphar, who's a high-ranking official. There's nothing and you're trying to tell me he ran away. Oh, come on, who are you trying to kid? Come on, who are you trying to sell that to? So you know what he said to her? And you have to listen. This is fun. I'm going to expand on what he said to her. He said to her, look what it says in the Torah about Ruvain. Now the words of the Torah, when Ruvain moved his father's bed around, what were the words of the Torah? The words of the Torah was he slept with his father's concubine. She doesn't know that the oral tradition means that he moved the beds around. But Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta showed her what it says in the written Torah, which is that Reuven slept with his father's concubine. And she says to him, he says to her, and look what it says about Yehuda. Right? Look what it says about Yehuda openly, that she was behaving like a harlot. So he said to her, listen, here you have Yehuda and you have Reuven, who are both under their father's jurisdiction, living with the rest of the Jewish people. If there's anything to whitewash, that's what we would whitewash. For Yosef, who's living alone in Egypt, and he's a single guy in Egypt, we have no need to whitewash this. The fact that over here we don't whitewash, so then you could believe me over here if we're telling you this happened, that it was not whitewashed. Otherwise we would have whitewashed this also.
He's got amigo.
Amigo, very good. It's exactly. If I really wanted to tell, I would have, what do you call it over here? So he says to her, the fact that we said the truth, the fact that we told you that over there. By the way, you're in the Gemara itself, sometimes guys say, Gemara gives an answer. And the guys say, what a stretch, right? Yeah, but the Gemara itself will often say, you know what, there's no answer, and he's out. He got to Yuftad. He got shlugged up. So if over here we're not slugging up, you can trust us because we're the first ones to say that the Gemara will say, well, he's got no response, and he's out of the game. He's been knocked out of the box. The Gemara itself says, so if we do give you an answer, even though you feel it's a stretch, the Gemara obviously didn't, because we're not stretching. Because you have plenty of other places where we just say, well, we don't have an answer. And there are other times where the Gemara says there's a brisa, the Gemara says it's a mishabeshta. The brisa was transmitted inaccurately, which means if it didn't say it, that means it was accurate. So, but look at what, now I'll show you something really remarkable. Take a look at every name in the Torah. Look at every name in the Torah. Just about. There may be a couple of exceptions. Adam Harishon is criticized. Chava is criticized. Noach is criticized. Right? He got drunk. Avram Avinu is criticized for saying Bameh Eda. He said to God, "How do I know that where you're the flaw in his faith?" Yitzchak is criticized because he was favoring Esav. He was deceived by Esav. Yaakov is criticized because he got angry at Rachel and he married two wives. Moshe Rabbeinu's criticized for getting angry. Aaron's criticized for getting involved with the golden calf. Miriam's criticized openly for speaking Lashon Hara. Every name in the Torah that you see, these are the greatest people in history. And when there's a flaw, the Torah is like, we don't whitewash anything, gentlemen. We're not whitewashing anything. If the Torah says Yosef didn't do it, then you can trust he didn't do it because we'd be the first to say he did. We'd be the first to say he did. Same thing with David HaMelech in Bathsheba. If the Gemara says that David HaMelech didn't sin, it wasn't the sin that we think it was, we're not whitewashing anything. We're not whitewashing because we have no need to whitewash. Because when somebody goes to the bad, the Torah says that was a mistake. You did the wrong thing. So she says, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta says to this Roman matradisa, if there was really a problem, we'd be the first ones to tell you there's a problem. Okay? Now, take a look what happens. As a result of this, Yosef gets tossed in the clink. Now, the Egyptians, it's called, Mrs. Potiphar tells a whole story, and the husband believes it, and then what does he do with Yosef? He puts him into the Beit Soar. He puts him into a pit. Later on, it's going to be referred to as a pit. Prison in those days, an Egyptian prison, was not the same as prison today. Prison today is you get 3 good meals, you have cable, and you could get a college degree, right? And if you're a Palestinian terrorist in an Israeli prison, you get treated even better, right? In those days, it was a pit, right? And Yosef gets thrown into a pit. How would you feel if you were Yosef at this point? Imagine you're Yosef at this point, right? You're down in the dumps. Yeah, no pun intended. Yeah, you're down in the, right, yeah, I like that one. Yeah, here you are. You've gone 9 yards for God. Right, here I was in a situation where I had such a temptation and I withstood the biggest test any man has ever had until the advent of the internet. I've withstood the biggest test any man has ever had in history. And what's my reward for that? I get tossed into a pit. First, I get kidnapped, get down to Egypt. I'm in a situation where nobody can blame me if I succumb, and I overcome the temptation. And what do I get? I get a pit, right? The Zelofair, as they say in Hebrew, Zelofair, right? You can understand that Yosef was, and what's Yosef's reaction? So Yosef goes, and all of a sudden the guy in jail, they put him in charge also. And then the next thing you know, the baker and the butler are in jail. Now, this is the strangest thing in the world. Because what happens? Take a look at Yosef at Perek Mem Pasuk. Where is it? Where is it? They're in prison and they have a dream. And look at this, page 218. Right? 7 lines from the top. They have a dream. Vayovo aleim Yosef baboker. Yosef comes to them in the morning. Vayarosam v'neim zoafim. He sees that they're miserable. How does Article translated? They're aggrieved. Right? They look horrible. Vayishal es sarise parasha ita b'mishra etador. Madu aptechem ramya. Why are you in such a bad mood, fellas? Why are you in such a bad mood? I mean, he's been in jail 10 years at this point. Why are you in such a bad mood? What do you got, kid? You know, you got a stairway to the stars over here? What are you in such a good? Nobody likes a gum snapper in the morning, right? And you'll say, especially when you're in prison. You know, what's so wonderful for you? I told you I once get a phone call. This girl calls up. She says, Rabbi Kaplan, I heard there's a guy in your shir. I have a friend who went to college with him. She says he might be a good shidduch for me. With Baalei Teshuvas, things work a little different than they do in the other. She calls me up. So I said, well, I said, tell me about yourself. She goes, I'm definitely a morning person. And I'm thinking to myself, no one is going to like you, girl. You know, nobody wants to see people in a good mood before they've had their coffee. You know, nobody's interested. They got married, and they got married. A wonderful, Baruch Hashem, they have a son. He's living in Israel now. He's learning at Mir. Right? They got married. It's a beautiful, wonderful shidduch. Right? Yosef said, "Hi, fellas, what's wrong? You look so aggrieved this morning." Aggrieved. What do you want, kid? What? You see a consistency in Yosef. Wherever Yosef was, whatever the situation, he's the same Yosef. It's the same Yosef. Yosef's in the prison. We'll see next week's Parsha what happens when he gets out. Yosef looks, this is all from the Ribono Shalom. I am in the Ribono Shalom. Put me in this situation right now. There's nothing to get down in. If I get down in the dumps, then that means I'm not accepting God's running of the world. So Yosef says to them, what's the problem? So they tell him they had dreams. And he interprets the first guy's dream, and he says, okay, you're going to get out in 3 days. And he interprets the second guy's dream with the birds eating the cake. He says, they're going to take in 3 days, they're going to hang you. So the commentator said, why did he need the second dream? What was the point to say? And surely enough, 3 days later, they take out the butler, and he's reinstated in his position, and the baker is taken out and he's hung. So the commentaries ask, why did they need the second dream for it? What was the purpose of the second dream? I understand the first dream, the guy's going to get out, and later he's going to be the guy to tell Paro, we got a dream interpreter in jail. So what was the point of the second dream? What do you need the second dream? He's dead. What do you need that for? The answer is, put yourself in Yosef's position. You got two guys who are high government officials. They've been thrown in jail. Guy tells you, oh yeah, 3 days you're getting out of prison. Oh yeah, 3 days you're going to become the chief baker again. You know, you're in a vulnerable position over there. I mean, what do you turn around and say, oh, 3 days, sorry, I got bad news. They're going to be hanging you and the birds are going to eat your flesh. You know, you're all alone in prison. The guy could turn around and slug you. They need the dream to show that the first one wasn't a shot in the dark. You know, you have a guy tells you to interpret a dream and you tell the interpretation, it turns out good. Okay, you got lucky. Maybe it's a shot in the dark. No, I interpreted a second dream also. That came true too. So the guy later on, he says to Paro, exactly as, and not only that, there's an opinion that they each dreamt the other one's interpretation. This Paro also and Nebuchadnezzar also. You see, when it came to dream interpretation, we see a lot of dreams over here. And one of the approaches here is each person dreamt. Do you ever try to think of a tune and you can't think of the tune? I'm trying to think of the tune. There was a certain tune I heard. I love that tune. And people say, wait, is this the tune? Da-da-da. No, that's not it. That's not it. Till somebody sings like, yeah, that's the one. Or with somebody's name. I can't remember this guy's name. You know, is it A, B, C, D? No. You know, people get irritated. The guy says, no. And all of a sudden somebody says, that's it. How do you know? I thought you didn't know. The answer is that you knew and somewhere it was there. So they each one dreamed the other one's dream, the other one's interpretation, but they didn't remember it. And Paro with the interpretations of the cows, next week's Parsha, same thing. They dreamt the interpretation, but they didn't remember it. And then when Yosef says it, that's it. He's accurate. That's how you know he's accurate. So when Yosef tells the butler, you're going to get out in 3 days, the baker here, he's right. That's the interpretation. That's why the Torah says each one they saw that he interpreted accurately. And then the flip-flop is the same. He interprets the baker's dream, and the butler had dreamt it. But I want to show you something that puzzled me for a long time. This puzzled me for a long time. Look at the dream, okay? Look at the dream. The Sar HaMashkim on page 218, right in the middle of the page, probably the Pasuk test, on 218, right smack in the middle of the page. Vayesaper Sar HaMashkim es chalomo liyosef. Vayomer lo b'chalomo v'ine gefen lefanai. The Sar HaMashkim says, well, there's a vine in front of me. Uvagefen shlosha sarigim. There are three branches. V'keporachas also nitzev shulash kosan, and the grapes are ripened. V'kos paro biyadi. I'm holding Paro's cup in my hand. Va'ekach es ha'anovim. I took the grapes. V'eschat osan al kopar. I squeezed the grapes into the cup. V'etenes hakos al kaf Paro. What a dream! I had grapes. I squeezed the grapes into a cup, and I put the cup in Paro's hands. And there are 3 of them. Now, Paro's birthday is in 3 days. And this is a big celebration, which means that there are loudspeakers all over. Hear ye, in 3 days, the king's having a celebration. That number 3 is a prominent thing. His birthday, everybody knows. And Yosef says, ooh, in 3 days, you're going to be squeezing grapes into a cup and putting it out. But the interpretation is that in 3 days, you're going to be squeezing grapes and putting it into Paro's hands. That was the dream. That was exactly the dream. What's the grace of Chochmah over here? Ooh, what a dream interpreter. I dreamt that I'm squeezing grapes into a cup and I'm going to put it in Paro's hands. And Yosef says, the interpretation is you're going to be squeezing grapes into a cup and putting it into Paro's hands. Mamish, unbelievable. Unbelievable. Right? Then we're going to see that next week with the cows also. The various interpretations of fat cows and thin cows, what do you call it? The healthy stalks of wheat. And he talks about meat and wheat. This one's telling him you're going to have 7 daughters and they're going to die. And this one's telling him you're going to conquer them. Yosef says, it's going to be famine. It represents food. No kidding. Wheat and meat, right? It represents food, right? Gee, what a shot. You see that sometimes the miracle isn't that what he says. The miracle is that no one else can chop it. It was such a difficult dream. And then when you hear the interpretation, that's the funniest part. The funniest part is, what was your dream? Squeezing 3 and I'm putting the cup in Paro's hands. And what's the interpretation? Squeezing and putting a cup in Paro's hands. Unbelievable. That means that sometimes everybody else around you is blind. Everybody else around you is blind. That's the miracle. Not his wisdom. It's the blindness of everything else. Okay, last point. And this is phenomenal. Not mine, obviously. Yosef says to the guy, he interprets the dream. And on page 212, 218, Yosef says, bottom of the page. Ki im zachartani itcha. He interprets the dream. He says, kasher yitav loch. Vasisa naim adi chesed. Do me a favor. Viskartani el paro. Vasisesi min abayisa. Get me out of this place. He says, in 3 days you're going out of prison. Please remember to meet a paro. And what happens? At the last pasuk in the Parsha, v'lo sochar saramashki bes Yosef ha'ishkacheu. He forgot Yosef. Comes along Rashi, and Rashi says, in the left column, Vayeishkacheu. Mipnei sheikh, the left column of Rashi, last Rashi on the page. Left column, 3 lines from the bottom. Mipnei shetola bo Yosef lizochro, because Yosef relied on him to remember him. Huzkak lios osur shtei shonim. He had to stay 2 more years in prison. The question is, what did Yosef do wrong? Guy's leaving prison. What's wrong with asking him to mention you to Paro? Hey, can you tell Paro that I'm in here 10 years already, trumped up charges? I'm innocent. Can you just mention me to Paro? What's wrong with it? What's wrong with making hishtadlus? All the avos, they were all shepherds. They worked for a living. They made hishtadlus. They were shepherds. They worked for their parnasa. Yaakov Avinu worked for Lavan day and night. What's wrong with making hishtadlus? Making an effort. Number one, why next to why 2 years? So there are different explanations, the different approaches. What did Yosef do wrong here? So there's one approach that says at Yosef's level, he should have had faith in God alone. I'm not thrilled with that answer. Because they all made hishtadlus. What's wrong with going? You could go to a doctor if you need a personal way. You go to a doctor. What's wrong with it? So I heard one of the explanations, I think it's the Chazon Ish, says, the difference between hishtadlus and desperation. Imagine you're in prison and there's a Palestinian terrorist in prison too. And now he's getting out of prison. You even interpreted his dream for him. They say, hey, can you do me a favor? Right? Palestinian prisoners are not going to do you a favor. To ask a Palestinian terrorist to do you a favor, even if you've done him a favor, just be happy he doesn't set himself off and blow himself up with you with him. Don't go to ask this Egyptian who hates Hebrews to go and ask him to do you a favor. Yosef is crossing on. To do hishtadlus, you could do hishtadlus. But why are you crossing the line over here? This is desperation. You really think this guy's going to help you out? Do you really think, what that's like? It's like being in a car. Yeah, the Chazon Ish said there was a guy in his town. And you ever hear people say, well, it can't hurt. It can't hurt. The Chazon Ish said there was an eccentric guy in his town, Herschel, the eccentric, who used to walk around with glasses frames with no lenses. So people said, Herschel, that doesn't help you see better. But it can't hurt. What would you think of that? Listen, don't be ridiculous. What do you mean can't hurt? Sure, that can't hurt. It's like you're stuck in traffic, so you start pushing on the dashboard. Why are you pushing on the dashboard? I want to move my car through traffic. It's not going to help. It can't hurt. Yeah, it can. It can, because you're doing something silly. So the Chazon Ish says the criticism of Yosef is not for doing hishtadlus. It's for being desperate, doing something desperate, because that's not going to work. And you should have realized it doesn't work. But then I heard the best explanation I've ever heard. Best explanation I've ever heard. Why did Yosef get 2 years in prison? When did Yosef ask the guy? When did he tell the guy to please remember me? He interpreted his dream. He said, in 3 days you're going to get out of prison, right? In 3 days you're going to get out. Please mention me to Paro. Had Yosef said it on the last day, as the guy's getting out of prison, there'd be no criticism of it. Nothing's happened to Yosef. He hasn't gotten free. So there's nothing wrong. The guy's leaving prison. So now ask him, why did you preempt it by 2 days? You asked 3 days before he got. That means you yourself are making a statement. I don't believe anything could happen in the next 2 days. You preempted it by 2 days. And remember, by the spies, how does God punish the spies? What does the Torah say? How many years were they punished in the desert? 40 years. Corresponding to what? 40 days that the spies were in land. Because God punishes Yom Lishana, A year per day. A year per day. So how many? Yosef's flaw here was he preempted it by 2 days. Therefore, he gets another 2 years in prison. Therefore, he gets 2 years in prison. And if he asked on the last day, there's no time to. Okay, listen, guy's leaving. I'm still in prison. So I asked the guy, make normally stop. Why are you asking 3 days in advance? That means you yourself are saying nothing's going to happen between now and the time we get out of prison. That's the Tana on Yosef. Alich Chanukah, everybody.